get started. So I know, I believe you guys are both in high school, right?
Yes.
Okay, so let's discuss academics and how that can bring some stress to you guys or some anxiety, burnout, all that kind of stuff. So I know you guys have some really good questions for Tomi. You want to go ahead and get started?
Yes, of course. And again, thank you so much for being here,
Thank
Tomi, and
you,
talking with us about
Angel.
this. My first question is, how does academic stress show up in youth emotionally and physically?
Oh, that is a good question. So thank you, Angel, for sharing
Of
that.
course.
Emotionally, of course, and I think I even said this in actually another episode before, was a lot of the anxiety that we're seeing. Again, you have to be diagnosed like a medical
Mm-hmm,
diagnosis,
mm-hmm.
but again, it's that feeling of being overwhelmed, overstimulated, a lot of information, a lot of things coming out your way. And again, academically does put a pressure in that,
Yeah.
especially as
Yeah.
youth in schools and stuff. So I feel like emotionally we're seeing that, and even the numbness where again you just feel like, you know what, I don't feel anything right now because you're just kind of like, it feels like it's too much to feel in a way, but that is still a feeling of feeling numbness. So
Right.
emotionally, I think that sometimes we hear a lot of teens and youth saying that they're feeling anxious, they're feeling overwhelmed, or they're also just feeling like, I don't feel anything. So that's also scary to hear that when someone says that. Physically, of course, and this is something that we hear like kind of like, long-term conditions that can show up physically in your body, fatigue. So someone feeling like, I'm so tired, I'm so this. And I know we kind of throw the term around like, I'm so tired, but when someone is starting to become fatigue, it's kind of like that exhaustion, that burnout that we hear a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes into, again, person probably feeling headaches and migraines, and then the burnout and exhaustion happens. So there's a lot of things that we're probably seeing in youth today, especially academically, because it's that peer pressure, peer, even family pressure, all of it. That's kind of like, I have to be on, I have to get good grades. Or even if you're not getting good grades, and then it's that opposite of like, why can't you be this way? Or why can't you be like your peers who are doing this? So now you're feeling like, oh, the other side academically, if you're not feeling well, that you're a failure. So either way, there's a lot that happens, a lot emotionally and physically that can show up academically for youth and stuff.
For sure, for sure. No, and I mean, I don't know if you guys deal with that, hopefully not, but I mean, this is, I think, the space to,
Yeah.
learn about this stuff, from an expert, from a professional. Yeah, I mean, this is your guys' space to, ask questions. And, I'm sure a lot of the questions that you guys have, most of our viewers are going to have those questions as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, following that, what are unhealthy coping behaviors linked to academic pressure?
Yes. So I think I kind of touched a bit
little
about
bit.
that as well.
Yeah.
Like, again, the overworking, that's a
Yes.
biggest thing as well too. The sleep deprivation, like again, not getting enough sleep. If youth are not getting enough sleep, again, their brains are still developing. That's a very, again, concerning thing where you have to get a lot of sleep. And so I feel like, again, school time, there is a lot of that pressure where it's like you're getting more work, you're getting more this, and you have to complete it in a certain deadline, which makes sense because you're going to have to complete that when you get to college. But sometimes as a youth, as a young person, you need that balance where it's like,
Right.
yes, and you leave it all. So I feel like schools need to kind of look at their curriculum and how they're having students like complete these and see if it's very realistic, honestly, in my opinion, honestly. The avoidance, I think that's a biggest thing too, where we're seeing that kind of like lack of communication, or that place of like, I just want to avoid it, I want to go away, I don't want to deal with it, I don't want to get into the conflict. So people are not really wanting to have those conversations that might be a little hard with friends and family, right? Because you're just like, I don't want to get in a conflict, I don't want to hear them say something, yell, this and this. So you know what, I'm just gonna avoid it. But you already know there's that passive aggressiveness where you can tell when someone is mad,
Yep.
but they're not telling you. And then again,
Yeah.
it just leads into bigger tension. So that's a huge one. The emotional shutdown as well too. I think that's a very, unfortunately, it can lead to unhealthy, but at the same time you understand why sometimes you do the emotional shutdown, right? Because that sometimes it's that place of like, well, no one's really listening to me. No one's really hearing me out. Again, we just talk about academics. I have to be this way, that way. So I feel like I can't even share to my family or friends about what I'm really feeling emotionally. So I'm just going to shut it down. I'm just going to bury it deep down inside of me, right? That's what we hear. And just keep trudging along. But long term, that can really show up bad. And then again, the biggest thing that I think the unhealthy type of coping behavior is that self-criticism aspect. Criticizing yourself, and again, those lies of, I'm not enough, I can't do this, my peers are doing this, my mom is right, my dad is right, da 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 da, blah blah blah. Like, you hear those type of self-criticism aspect of like the lies that I just hear at times. And again, I've heard those lies for years and thought that was the same thing. And put me in a place where I feel like I couldn't do enough. And then it wasn't until I always say this, until God really helped me to understand who I am in him to really move me forward. So I feel like those are things that I'm starting to see in a lot of youth and teens that just are like unhealthy, that we got to do a lot in our generations together as a community to really unchange that and hopefully turn into healthy coping behaviors, healthy coping strategies, you know? So yeah.
Yeah, and I love that you say that because, we talk about the problem, but you're giving us some sort of solution, right? Something to really think about. And then, it's going to be different for everyone because we're going to, deal with it in different ways.
Right.
But that's great that you mentioned that. Another thing is, we're talking about academic, but I think sometimes, the problems come maybe from the family side of things, right? From the way that we grew up, from the way that, our parents acted. And not that it's wrong because, most of our parents are, amazing parents, but you still might be dealing with some stuff that you might not share with them.
Right.
Maybe they don't even know, right? But how do you think family and cultural expectations contribute to youth mental health?
Ooh, I think that one, right? Ooh,
Right.
girl. I'm like, man, we could honestly spend a long time in that one. And I feel like, but again, that family and cultural expectations, it can be the two-way thing I said. It's either you're doing really well and you kind of have to stay at that, right?
Yeah.
Or let's just say, especially with siblings, and we hear this, and this is where it has to be careful with comparison, where let's just say the oldest child is doing well, they're kind of like the overachievers, and then the youngest child is maybe the rebellious one. The one that's a little like, I don't want to do this, I want to do it my way, but then the parents kind of be like, why can't you be this way? Look at your older sibling, they're the one doing this, and then it's like, don't do that, because now that younger sibling's always going to think I can't be like them, and of course they can't because they're different, right? But it's that constant thing, and then that could actually turn into jealousy, and this is where you start seeing that sibling type of rivalry where person's like trying to outdo each other, and then you're like wondering why, and then it wasn't until like, and it's, the movies, it's not until one day they're adults and they ask, why are we always doing this, and you're like, well, remember that one time you and mom said that, and you're like, oh, so it actually starts. So that's where it has to, families have to be really careful what they say around each other. I get it. You want your child to succeed academically. Who doesn't, right? You want your friend group to this or whatever, but that's where you have to be careful with your words, because words do have a big impact on people. I think people used to say sticks and stones don't break my bones, but and words don't, but now we're seeing that yes, words can actually hurt someone deeply, right? So I think that's something as the families and the culture, you have an expectation, making sure your child really does well in school and etc. and like in life, but you have to also find the balance that they're just human beings. And you have to be careful with your words. And doesn't mean that they shouldn't come with like, hey, don't talk back or come correct, but you still need to see the other side of them, that they're just still trying to learn and grow, and that they're not like their siblings, or they're not like their certain people, they're themselves. So find what that person likes, find what that young person likes, and try to cultivate that. I think that's a huge thing that sometimes culturally, it's the biggest thing I think I've heard this is, as ethnic group, I'm Nigerian, so it's kind of like you're either going to be a doctor, right, medical doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, right, or a nurse or something. And if you say I want to do art, they look at you like, art? Like, what are you going to give me money with art? Like, So, but again, you don't know how God can bless that, right? And so, of course, you still have to think logically, like, yes, go to school, do your regular things, get at least a good paying job, but still work on the hobby if you can. But so if you give that space for a child to actually cultivate that, it really does help them mentally long term.
Awesome. No, that's great to know. That's great to know, because I know, Hispanic, households tend to be that same way too. Like there's a lot of pressure to, be someone good. My parents always told me, like, I want you to be better than me.
Same.
And I look at my parents and I'm like, okay, well, that's gonna be kind of tough because you guys are amazing parents.
Okay,
you guys are great. But there's that, and I know you guys can probably agree to that. There's that expectation of like, you gotta go big. Especially being maybe coming from immigrant parents and stuff. It's even tougher to like make them proud, and that could have a lot of pressure on you. I deal with that myself, so I get it.
And actually, like, how you were mentioning like your parents giving you like academic pressure, kind of like, why does it feel harder to express that pressure with your loved ones?
Ooh. Again, because it's like that space of feeling like, how can we say, like, your parents are probably constantly, right? And I think we have all felt this in some time, where it's like constantly they're hearing you need to go to school, you need to do this, you know where we started, you know how we're living, I want you to be here, I want you to do better. And of course, that's important, right? But when you're constantly kind of saying that and it feels like this type of crutch, like the child has to do this to make it seem like all your labor is worth it, right? All your labor of you sacrificing nights maybe to put a food on the table, to make sure that they have clothes on their back, and kind of making it seem like that child now is at the place of like, okay, once you make it, then it makes it seem like my labor is worth it, right? And so, of course, if you're hearing that constantly as a young person, I can only imagine you're going to feel a little pressure of like, yeah, I can't tell my mom or my dad that I'm going through this, or I don't even like maybe engineering or something, right? Like, let's just say they're on the path of making you an engineer, right? And you're like, actually, I really don't like it, right? I like this actually, but my parents don't want me to. So you hear a lot of times when people go to college and they're like, yeah, I actually maybe either dropped out or they're doing something else, but they're so scared to tell their parents. It's because they're scared to hear what they're going to say, because it's back to that, well, all my work I did for you. And I get it. You worked hard, but you have to understand that your labor, it shouldn't be some type of expectation that they have to do it good in life. You should just pour into your child because you want to pour into your child. And God gave you responsibility to take care and guide that child. Now, by the time they get to 18 and even older, that's where hopefully by the grace of God, they take all the amazing work you've done and they spread their wings. And then that's where I feel like it's a measure of your success, when you see that young person being a really good person in the community, right? In society, that they're giving back, they're being kind to other people, they're actually providing and contributing to the society in some type of meaningful way. I feel like when you start seeing those type of fruits, you kind of be like, okay, my job is good. I did it, you know? And so I think that's what makes it really hard, that if you're not really having that type of space where you can really talk about that with your parents, it's going to make it hard for that young person to feel like, okay, I can ask for help, or I can talk to my mom or dad about this, because they feel like the minute I say that, they're going to think I'm ungrateful. They're going to think I don't care, or all their sacrifices meant nothing. So that's why I think a lot of teens and youth just kind of like, you know what, I'm just going to just put my head down. My mom wants me to do this way, and just move along. But you already know that's where it hurts. That's where the resentment starts to happen. And then you see older adults start saying, well, I haven't talked to my mom in 5 years. And you're like, how do you know? I just talked to my mom yesterday.
Right, an hour ago.
Right. You're like, how do you not talk? And it's because they start saying, well, my mom expected this, or didn't care to really listen to me. You know, forget her. And you're like, dang. So
yeah, that's tough.
It's tough. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, I can, I'm like, man, you're saying all of this, and I'm like, oh man, that's me. But I think my parents did a great job of, building that, they're tough, and they're, they expect a lot, but you still, personally, I still feel like, even if I don't become this, famous broadcaster that my mom wanted me to become, I know that even if I don't make that happen, if I'm a good person, like you said, I have a good job and everything, I'm still gonna make her proud. And I think parents need to learn that as well too. So you guys are young and you guys are going to college very soon, so there's a chance that you guys might experience something like that, but now you guys have tools and information to maybe work with that better, and get better and feel better. So that's great.
With that, with all the comparison, how do you think the comparison with families or communities affect the personal confidence?
Like with that, Jeyda, I feel like it quietly erodes that self-worth, right? It makes it feel like kind of like, dang, I'm not kind of like worthy to just be myself. Like I have to be this type of maybe thing that my family or whoever, my loved one, is expecting me to be. But for me, I just want to go and just sleep and sit down somewhere, right? So if I don't be that whatever they're expecting me to be, it's like just being myself, or just kind of being, doesn't feel like I'm not worth it. And again, that's a lie, right? And I tie this again to my faith, because it's those things where it's like, God and so many others don't expect you to be anything but yourself, because we're created uniquely. I'm not expected to be like Angel, Jeyda, Valentina, just expected to be Tomi, right? And it's important to understand and realize that when you now have it, that place where you're kind of affecting the confidence and saying, no, you got to do it this way, you got to be this way, that child kind of feels like, or a young person just feels like, gosh, just myself is not even enough for
Right.
you anymore. And
Mhm.
I think that's where I'm just, again, concerned, because now you're seeing people trying to be something they're not. Like, you see them in social media and they're starting to do, I think we we're talking about the ASMR stuff, and, or, you know, and I love ASMR stuff, but they're starting to do things that you kind of look at it and you're like, is that really good?
Mhm.
And then later on, you hear a lot of people who are like, yeah, I thought I had to do it this way in order to make it in life,
Mhm.
or in order to make my parents proud.
Mhm.
So I think that's where I really see that it could affect people's confidence, that it can make them do things, or not make them, but like, in a way, kind of like they feel like they have to do something that they're just like, originally that wasn't really me, but because I need to fit in,
Mhm.
I'm gonna just go here and do that just to be accepted,
Right.
just to be socially accepted type
Yep.
of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
You know, and the social pressure is even higher now. You know, we were talking
Yeah.
about this in the last episode with
Yeah.
the other two interns, and you know, pressure is a lot higher nowadays than it was maybe
Yeah.
when we were younger, maybe when we were their age.
Yeah.
So it's a lot, but I think, you know, we're discussing the issues and we're discussing some of the ways to deal with it.
Right.
But what would you tell someone, a family, how can they support without harming their child's mental health or their brother's mental health? You know, how can families actually do this? What are the tools they can use?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest tool is, again, talking.
Right.
Like actually create that space to check in and talk to them and stuff like that. Ask like, hey, how are you? Not just how are you and just keep it pushing, but like sit with them and say, hey, how are you really doing? Or even invite them and say, hey, let's watch a movie. What do you want to do this weekend or something? Like, sometimes doing some type of activity together can actually lead to like maybe then you having that conversation about something else, and then you're like, oh, okay, I finally got to able to know what my teen is going through and what they're facing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think another tool is definitely have resources on hand, especially that if your teen does share to you saying, hey, mom, dad, I'm having thoughts of suicide, or I'm going through a really tough time, and maybe school or the pressure or home or whatever. Of course, you're hearing that, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, why?
Right.
I'm not doing enough. It's not about you. I gotta say that it's not about you, please, because again, I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine if my child, and I, by the grace of God, don't ever hear it, but like saying that, you probably would feel crushed a bit.
Yeah.
You probably feel like, dang, did I do something wrong for you to start thinking that way?
Yeah.
Did I not give you the food, or but remember, sometimes it's not really about yourself of what you did and did not do.
Yeah.
It just is, everybody goes through their own journey. Everybody is exposed to certain things in their environment that they're like, okay, this is what I'm going through. So you have to understand that it's not about you in that moment. It's about your teen. It's about them getting the care that they need so you guys can actually move forward in that. And so I think biggest thing is making sure to have resources on hand, have mental health resources, have a community support if you know a therapist and stuff. And I know ethnically, I think we talk about culturally sometimes, especially the Latin community, myself, Nigerian, African community, Black community, not very notorious or good at going to say, I'm going to seek a therapist, right? You hear that word and they're like, oh, no.
Like, you don't need that.
Right? You're like, you don't need that, talk to me. But at times we need, a therapist is not like your be all end all, like they're going to solve it.
Yeah.
But it's a nice sounding board that I see it as like a thing of, they don't really know you in a way. So they're very bit more objective, and they can be able to really look and see things that maybe yourself as a parent and yourself as a teen, or even in community that somebody very well, they're looking at a very unbiased way of whatever you're going through. So then they're able to offer information, self-help strategies, as well as resources to you, that if you was going to a parent or someone that you love, you're like, no, this is how it is. And you're like, but you're not really listening to me. So it kind of goes into the biggest thing of learn how to listen.
Yeah.
That's a big thing too. We listen, don't judge.
Right.
Make sure to like just sit there calmly. I know you're probably like, but listen to them, and then be able to have active listening where you repeat back what they're saying, not in a way of like, what, you're going through this, but you're like, okay, so as you said this, I'm hearing that you're feeling pressure from school, you're feeling this way, et cetera, et cetera. That young person's going to be like, wow, mom and dad, you really
Right.
listened to me. Okay.
Right.
You're
Right.
understanding. And then I think the biggest thing, if you don't feel like you can have that conversation yourself, it's okay to say, you know what? I might not be the best one, because I think sometimes again, as I would think as a parent, you feel flustered and you don't feel like what you will say is going to be right. And that's actually a huge thing. If you could be aware that you might say something that can probably trigger your child or that can really make them feel some way, say, okay, you know what, let's go to the therapist. Let's go talk to your auntie and uncle. Oh, I know you like talking to your uncle because he's cool. Maybe let's go talk to him. That right there even is better, because sometimes your own silence of just being quiet to be careful what you're saying actually is helpful, because we have to understand that words do make a big impact for people, and we have to be careful what we say. Not all the time, but certain things, especially when someone's going through a very hard time, especially a young person. Your first way of how you deal with it is going to be a big impression on them. And if you don't handle it in a very good way, that might be the place where they'd be like in their head, even if you're trying afterwards, and you should still try, even if you make mistakes, that's okay.
Right.
But they might have that circulating like, oh, my mom is going to be this way. You know, it's going to happen. So they have to little by little trust you again to give you that information.
No, that's great information. And I know we were talking about this in the previous episodes too, you know, with the example of my friend, and, you know, she, you know, gave her child the confidence to be able to talk to her, right?
Right.
So that's huge. That's huge, because now he feels like he can go to her, you know, and that's maybe something that we all, you know, wish we had or we did have.
Right.
And maybe that's something we can also practice with, you know, our friends, you know.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a child to, you know, to be there for someone. You know, you could do that for your friends or for your cousins, like you said, or for your family members, for your coworkers. You know?
No, that part with coworkers. Come on.
Exactly. You know, like it's the people that you see the most if you really think about it. So it's nice to be able to, you know, and I believe we have that here, you know, in the media team of El Sol. I know I can go to, you know, any of my coworkers and be like, hey, dude, you know, something happened to me. Like, do you mind talking about it? And I feel much better right after. And they know that they can do the same with us. So, you know, it's just spreading that awareness that we're there for each other, right?
Yeah, and it's good to create that space.
For sure. For sure.
And actually kind of going off of like how you were mentioning the success and like parents wanting your children to be doctors or like STEM kind of related majors.
Yeah.
How do you think we can really redefine that when children desire something else from what their parents desire?
Ooh, that's a good question. Honestly, no, Angel, that's a really good question. Again, I think yes. No, honestly, I think that's something where it's like, again, you. I see this in a sense of like, you have to remember that it's not about you. Like, you probably have your things that you're like, oh, I wanted to like do this when I was older. I wanted to succeed. And so you kind of see this sometimes where they always say you're living through your child. So you're having them kind of like do certain things and stuff. But then, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, it doesn't really like help the most when you kind of do that, because your child is different from you. So you have to like be careful with that as well. They might be like, oh, I want to aspire to be kind of like you. But again, they're still different. So I think like, recognizing that again, they're different from you. You have your own goals. They have their own goals as well too in life. You have to recognize that early on and see them as their own person. It may be hard, but again, every person's unique. So when you can finally internally say, okay, you know what, they're their own person. I'm just here to, as a parent, to guide, to help them, to love them, to give them support, to give them a place to stay. And then of course, one day they will leave this house and contribute to society in their own way. Right. That's where you have to see this. So I think you have to acknowledge first in that sense. And then, of course, I think I mentioned before is reaching, seeing what the young person likes to do. I think at early ages, how many times you heard those stories where they always say, oh, yeah, when I was younger, I've been drumming since I was like 2 years old. And from there, now they're a big drummer in life or whatever. I don't know. They're just doing something more. But it's because the parents in that time didn't say, no, stop drumming. Stop drumming.
And they observed and they went with it.
That part, right? And so I think that's the thing where it's like, if you're noticing different gifts in your child from the young person, cultivate that, right? And of course, I think that's the thing where it's like, sit with them and have a conversation on why they still need to maybe pursue college, right? Pursue different things, because at the end of the day, the economy of this world and how it is and stuff. So still going to college, getting that type of degree and getting something at least to help you start. Because I think sometimes what happens is like, you see all the influencers today and you think, oh, they're so big and that's all they did. But many of times when they sit down and tell their stories, they say, well, actually, I was working in tech, or I was working in, what is it called? In X, Y, and Z. I was doing something before I got into this. So you kind of still need to have some income to help you towards wherever you're going in the long run. So sometimes it's not saying that your goal, what you're doing, is not really profitable. It just means that in the world and society that we live in, sometimes they're like more geared towards certain professions than others. So you have to cultivate your own other, like maybe your dream job a bit more. And maybe the other one you're doing, it's just a little like, you know what, this is going to pay. There you go. It's going to pay my bills. It's going to do what I got to do.
Right.
But I think the parent has to sit down and have that real conversation of this is society that we're living in.
Yeah.
And we have to understand that and adapt in a way. But at the same time, you like to draw. Okay, what can we do as you're working on this to cultivate you liking to draw, and how we can work on both?
Yeah.
There you go. And I think that will be a very good place that the young person, the youth, the teen will feel very like, oh, okay. And now you probably see them going hard on their studies for a certain thing and going hard on their art because they feel like I have a safe space to do kind of both and still cultivate my dream at the same time, instead of it saying, nope, this is what I want, this is what we have to do, and you can't cultivate that.
Yeah, that's very true. And you keep your parents happy at the same time.
Right. There you go.
You're like, hey, mom and dad, I'm still making money. So, that's right. But you know, that's great. That's great. And amazing questions, you guys. You know, this has been really good. I know we have more questions coming up. But no, so far, amazing conversations. I'm sure our listeners are also, you know, agreeing with a lot of the stuff we're doing. And that's what we want, right? We want to be able to relate to our audience and relate to everything that we're going through, because pretty sure it's almost the same thing.
That part.
Right? Awesome. Thank you guys.